What's up, YouTube? This here is just a video, man. Today, just wanted to look at this segment on ESPN First Take with Dan Orlovsky and Stephen A. Smith here. This Dan Orlovsky, man, he's a strange character. I remember first hearing about him. I mean, this was after his career in the NFL, which was not much to speak of, but he became famous, or we'll put him out there, was his defending of Carson Wentz. This was during a season where Carson Wentz was having the worst year of his career. Or a little bit prior to that, it was having the worst year of his career. And during Dan Orlovsky was going against the grain against all the other analysts out there and actually looking at film and finding every way to explain how it was everyone's fault except Carson Wentz on plays. And this got him a lot of love from Eagles fans and also, local Eagles media who agreed with some of that, and some just downright just wanted to hear what he was saying and wanted to hear some other excuse or whatever, for why their franchise quarterback was not living up to expectation. Now, for whatever reason, I don't know, Dan Orlovsky early in the season is very high on the Dallas Cowboys and is extremely uncharacteristically critical of the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, the cynic in me tells me that there's some other reason for it. Maybe producers on the show is telling him, he has to step it up. Maybe he feels threatened by, many of the recent cuts, so he has to change his tune. I don't know. But I find it hard to believe that a guy who was extremely critical of Dallas last season and a guy who actually supports guys like Kellen Moore last season and was more so against Dak, that now all of a sudden, after Kellen Moore leaves and Mike McCarthy, a guy who he's not really high on in terms of a play caller, takes over the play calling, how all of a sudden now he's extremely high on Dallas. If you look at the moves Dallas made, they picked up Brandon Cooks, a guy that, they made this big, deal about. I didn't see Kellen Moore. I didn't see Brandon Cooks as being anything more than, a T.Y. Hilton replacement, albeit just maybe a few years younger, but pretty much he brings the same thing as T.Y. Hilton. What I feared was the prospect of the Dallas Cowboys picking up DeAndre Hopkins. Now, had they done that, that would have gotten my attention. DeAndre Hopkins actually would have helped a whole lot of their red zone woes, But no, they went with Brandon Cooks. I guess they felt like they needed speed because, CeeDee Lamb is not quite a burner, neither is Michael Gallup. So there's that. But my point is, I find it hard to believe that Dan Orlovsky is just all of a sudden so much higher on the Cowboys this year as opposed to last year. The only differences between last year's team and this year's team is no Kellen Moore, them signing Stephon Gilmore. Gilmore moved the needle that much for you? I don't see how. Brandon Cooks, and then drafting Mozzie Smith and this little guy, this running back, this Deuce Vaughn that they don't use. But anyway, let's go to it.
Dan, do you think the Cowboys' loss is a bad sign moving forward?
No, it's not a bad sign. This was a bad game by Dallas. Now, there are questions that I can't even look at them. There are questions that linger, kind of what happened last week. And this is me being serious now, unfortunately.
Steve.
So the Wednesday Trevon Diggs injury matters as a overall part of this conversation. You know what I'm saying? To sit there and say that this isn't a significant loss to this football team, both on the field and off the field, isn't accurate. So, just number one, the injury happens on a Wednesday of a road game. That all of a sudden now, what your defensive plan is and how you're going to defend that team is completely different. It's not just plug and play. So they got to figure out who they are and who they can be without Trevon. If we took Darius Slay off the Philadelphia Eagles, we're having a very different conversation about their defense.
Now, the reason why I can't accept this is the nature of the way Dallas Cowboys lost to the Cardinals. The Dallas Cowboys did not lose to the Cardinals because of Dobbs throwing for 400 yards or even 300 yards in the year. He barely even passed for 200 yards in the year. And it wasn't just him constantly attacking Bland. Bland gave up 2 passes. All right. So it isn't like where Diggs was constantly attacked and that was the reason they lost. No, they lost because they gave up over 200 yards on the ground. Whether Trevon Diggs is there or not, those 200 yards on the ground are going to happen. He's not known as some major run stopper. He's known as a cover corner. So that is a very weak point on the part of him. Now, it's true that it could have had some effect to them. It could have affected them as far as their spirit, their overall energy. That's possible. But that isn't something that I'm going to attribute to Diggs. That's going to come if they are affected by Diggs leaving. That is something that is the result of weak culture. The coaches did not have them ready. They were not given a speech that was inspiring. They were not given a new perspective on it. I recall when the Philadelphia Eagles had lost the great Jerome Brown. To death, and what became the mantra of that season was bring it home for Jerome. And this actually inspired the Eagles to have one of the greatest defensive seasons ever. It didn't sap their energy, and that was because of the coaching staff and the leadership on the team, galvanizing the team and using that as a means to pump them up and motivate them. And that's the thing about any tragedy or any bump in the road or any setback. You can either let the setback destroy you, or you can be galvanized by it and energized by it. And really, it's going to depend on the culture that's prevalent there. The culture in the Dallas Cowboys, I'm telling you, is the problem. And Dan Orlovsky is never going to address that because Dan Orlovsky, to me, is a two-dimensional thinker as an analyst. He focuses on X's and O's, but he doesn't focus on some of the deeper, more emotional aspects of football.
We took a Denzel Ward off the Cleveland Browns, who have one of the best defenses in football this year. We're having a different conversation about that team. So I think it is a bad game, but we have to figure out, and Dan Quinn's got to show us who this defense is going to be without Trevon, and then the mentality of it. Because part of this is, you watch this defense play the first 2 weeks, and there was this moxie and this swagger and this almost trying to embarrass the other team. And that comes from knowing how good you are. And that got cracked just a little bit.
It comes from playing the New York Giants, a team that you have beaten almost 10 straight times. That's where that confidence comes from. Knowing the team, knowing the team's tendencies, knowing what the team's going to do, constantly beating the team, and just watching the Eagles beat them in the same fashion in the second round of the playoffs last year. Right, let's be for real. And then playing Zach Wilson, and the Jets. That's where that came from.
Weak. And so, bad game, but I want to see who they are without Trevon. Number 2, how they handle some of the things that defensively they've got to get figured out. But this is the broader part for me is, I think what happened last week could be the best thing that could have happened to Dallas. So the first 2 weeks, they skunk both teams, essentially. And there's no competition get thrown their way. And the narrative around this week, or the conversation around this week, this football team was in the red zone. And that's where I want to specifically go. Right now, this football team's not what it should be in the red zone. And that's because Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb. If this football team is going to be the best team in the NFL like it was before that injury, Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb got to become Tony Romo and Des Bryant. Stephen A. Kimberly.
I mean, there is truth to that. But the reality is, if you're looking at the Dallas Cowboys and you're an opposing defensive coordinator, and you know that CeeDee Lamb is their best target and practically their only target, if you know you don't have to worry about Pollard slamming it in there like you did with Zeke, shouldn't have let Zeke go or should at least replaced him with a similar style running back. If you know you ain't got to worry about that. If you know you don't have to worry about like a Dalton Schultz type of tight end or someone better than that. Like, if you know that, then what you're going to do is you're going to take away CeeDee Lamb. It's probably a situation where teams are just taking him away. I mean, that's just what teams do. So, I mean, that's easily said. It's common sense, but it's easier said than done.
Steven.
I'm trying to
I'm enthralled by it.
A. Smith is just in clown mode. You know, I'm not even going to spend a lot of time talking about Stephen A. Smith because he doesn't make any real cogent points that I accept other than, you know, just the typical Dallas Cowboys never going to do anything. Like, I mean, and it's really easy to determine why Dallas doesn't succeed. It's all culture. But, you know, Stephen A. doesn't really talk about that. He just, you know, whatever can go wrong will go wrong. You know, that the same stuff.
Right,
you know what I was thinking in my head? I'm like, Dan's a really good analyst.
Thank you.
I swear.
Thank you.
Carry on.
Here's my point with their red zone stuff. CeeDee Lamb has 2 red zone targets. That means they've thrown him the ball twice in 3 weeks.
Come on, Dan. You know that's probably because the teams are just taking him away.
Jake Ferguson has 8. Brandon Cooks has 6. They ain't throwing CeeDee Lamb the football. If Des Bryant was there,
the show is over at noon, right?
If Des Bryant was there, they would be throwing Des Bryant the football. That's the biggest thing that they got to get figured out. So, like, bad sign, bad game, but that to me is the bad sign that they're not throwing CeeDee Lamb the football in the red zone.
Couple of things. Let me make this. Let me just get this out of the way. First of all,
I don't know how much Stephen A. going to deal with because, like I say, he doesn't really make cogent points to me.
O'Malley, let me say something to you. Okay, you know what? You're a damn good host. Damn good host. Great. You want a cookie? Of course you're a great host. That's why you're hosting the show. So tell him Dan Orlovsky. It's such great analysis. Yeah, that's why he's on. That's why he's here. That's why you look forward to Thursdays with Dan Orlovsky's and Mondays to start off the show, even though Shannon Sharp is in the house too, because he is a damn good analyst. We have nothing but damn good analysts on this show. Okay, and you want a cookie? Here's the deal, okay? Let's get down to the nitty-gritty when we're talking about the Dallas Cowboys. You just brought up Dak Prescott. Excuse me, let me tell you something right now, Dan Orlovsky. This is the thing. That's why I couldn't hold back my laughter. Because you see, before we get to Dak Prescott, the last 2 years, what were we complaining about with the Dallas Cowboys? We were talking about penalties, were we not?
Yeah,
the
2 years ago, for
Cowboys,
sure.
the Dallas Cowboys in back-to-back 12-5 seasons committed 231 penalties, which was 26 more.
Now that's a great point that Stephen A. Smith brings up. Dallas Cowboys are very, very, traditionally a very undisciplined team. Now, like you said, it hasn't really hurt them in the first couple of games because they played against 2 teams they didn't respect, that they looked down on, that they were fully prepared for. So they kind of destroyed them. But once they're up against a fight, and then once they've been punched in the mouth, they have to fight back, that's when they began to be undisciplined. And that's when all of these things rear their ugly head. Like, it goes back to coaching. Like, honestly, I don't know how it is with this team. I don't even know these guys respect their coach. You know, like I said, like I always bring up, you got Micah Parsons, man. He goes on his podcast, says whatever the hell he wants. He talks about the opponents. He talks about, like, looking down on opponents. All of those things. I don't even know the type of culture where anyone can come to him and tell him to dial it back. You know? So, I mean, that's their problem. I know with the Philadelphia Eagles, pretty much the leadership of that team is pretty clear. You know, you got Jalen Hurts, who is the leader on that team, and the other guys pretty much follow suit. You don't have too many guys that are, like, going against the grain, except for A.J. Brown, who probably needs to be dialed back a little bit, but that would never, be the problem because A.J. Brown isn't the leader of the team. So, anyway, I'm going to end it there. I'm going to cut it short there. I don't know what it is with Dan Orlovsky this season. Maybe Dallas is just an early pick of his, so he has to stick to that pick, but he has to, at some point, be real about the situation. The Philadelphia Eagles are practically the same team. This idea that they lost, Hargrave and CJ and all of that type of stuff, all of a sudden propelling Dallas over them, is just nonsense. Philadelphia Eagles have pretty much the same offense, I think, with the upgraded running back of Swift, and I believe an upgrade with Jalen Carter over Javon Hargrave, especially when you consider how much the jump that Jordan Davis has actually made. Now this is even a better defensive line because not only are they able to rush the passer, but they also are 1,000 times better against the run. It's pretty much a similar secondary. C.J. Gardner-Johnson is the only significant loss in my opinion. However, the guys that we got in there are not chopped liver, and you will have the emergency of the rookie Sidney Brown, who I hope isn't too hurt this year. I heard he had a little hamstring problem. Got to look into that. But like this idea that Dallas is all of a sudden just propelled. I mean, they did the same thing last season, really. Beginning of the year, they were saying Dallas had the best defensive line, and then later as the years progressed on, they didn't even have a top 3 defensive line. Ours obviously was the best, the Eagles, and then the 49ers was the second best at least. The same thing with this year. I believe the best defensive line in the league is the Philadelphia Eagles. The second best is the Cleveland Browns, and then Dallas may be third. After I don't know, third or fourth or something, because you got to consider the 49ers line. All right, man. Hope you enjoyed this. I'm out. Peace.